this era of self-service, many stores and businesses have reduced costs by eliminating cashiers and installing do-it-yourself checkouts. Similarly, a church in Lucerne, Switzerland, has removed the need for a priest in the confessional. Now, Catholics can enter the confessional with their rosaries and recite 10 Hail Marys with the help of AIGC.
Hello, Jesus. Do you have some advice for us in this time?
In these challenging times, remember that in the face of adversity, love and faith are your steadfast guides. Just as I calm the stormy seas, so too can peace be found within your heart. Amidst life's tempests, let kindness and compassion steer your course.
Folks, do you see where this is headed? Who needs the real God when AIGC seems to have all the answers? It's almost like a biblical version of Siri or Alexa. However, the one true God offers us something much better, a personal relationship with Him. AIGC is not personal. It merely regurgitates pre-programmed words of Jesus found in the Bible. So what is missing in all of this? The Holy Spirit. You cannot receive His guidance digitally. This only happens through prayer, reading the Bible, seeking Him, and following His direction. Yes, AIGC can be a tool used by God to draw people closer to Him. However, let's not depend on this digital image of God created by humans, instead of turning to the one and only God who created humankind. Innocent intentions can easily evolve into idolatry. Remember, only through the blood sacrifice of Jesus do we have the promise of eternal life. AIGC cannot provide that. Only God can bring us what we long for: salvation, true love, and peace.
The global population is growing, and it's not expected to peak until well into the second half of this century. But the number of children that people are having is actually decreasing around the world. From a persistent cost of living crisis to the rapid cultural change of this hyper-digital era, the factors fueling this trend aren't easy to define. As more and more countries see their populations age, some fear unsustainable pressure will mount on the critical social infrastructure which holds communities together. So is it possible to plan ahead to limit the impact of falling fertility rates, and are there ways that societies could even benefit from it long term? You've been studying population trends for a long time now. Have you ever seen a shift like this?
The interesting thing about population is we focus on it when something seems dramatic, but actually the changes are quite incremental. We have been seeing this serious acceleration in growth and in fertility rates and everything. And now that's starting to slow down. So we are in a time of great change. But it's interesting because we report these things, and this is our business, right? In news, we report things when there is change. But what I've always found fascinating about fertility is, and population is, it is kind of slow. You know, it is incremental in the grand scheme of things.
But we aren't talking about a decline in fertility rates in this episode, but actually the global population itself is growing, and it's growing quickly. So can you put that into context?
So I was thinking about this the other day, and I think one of maybe the easiest ways to describe it is my family, right? My mum had 4 kids, and each of us has had fewer than that. My brother's had 3, I have 1, my other brother has 1, my sister has none. So each of us have had fewer children than my mum, but there's still 5 grandchildren in our family. So our family is growing, and the dynamics on a global level are similar. But there's also another dynamic that's going on, which is in certain countries, you have the dynamic like my family, and then at others, fertility rates aren't declining as dramatically. So there's a handful of countries where the population is still growing quite rapidly.
Is this Africa and Asia?
Most of them are in Africa, yeah, and big countries like Nigeria, Ethiopia, Egypt, but then also Pakistan, the Philippines. And they're going to contribute hugely to the growth in the global population. But they are the minority. So by 2050, I think 3/4 of the countries in the world will have a declining population, and then some will still be growing. Nigeria is one of the fastest growing countries in the world, but its fertility rate, so the number of children each woman is having, is declining. So it was 6 in the 50s, it's around 5 now. So all over the world, this generation is having fewer children than our parents.
So can we say that by the end of this century, is this fair, that the overwhelming majority of countries actually are not going to be able to sustain their populations?
Absolutely. And the global population by the end of this century will also be declining. Between 2060 and 2080, it's predicted that the global population will top out at about 9 or 10 billion and start declining then.
And then more specifically, Stephanie, what do we know about fertility rates in areas where the population is growing fastest?
So they're still declining, but just not as fast. So in Europe, you had an average of about 4 children in the middle of the century. Now it's gone down to well below 2. And this magic number is 2.1. So if each couple has 2.1 children on average, kind of hard to have 0.1 of a child, but then the population will sustain itself. So you need to produce that number to replace yourselves in the world. And countries that are still on this trajectory of growth, they have a lot more than 2.1.
So, Stephanie, I think everyone knows that it's been a year of elections, almost or around 70 we've had in 2024. And surely in most countries, one of the biggest issues has been the cost of living. And that is surely a factor when people are making decisions around whether or not to have a child.
Absolutely. I think it's the factor when it comes to, especially in places where populations is already declining. It comes up again and again. I've spoken to countless people in Japan or South Korea, and they talk about things like housing, the cost of education. In the UK now, it costs about 200,000 over a child's lifetime. That's the cost.
I was horrified when I saw that.
And it's incredible that anyone can afford that. Research came out earlier this year that it's surveys where they speak to young people, Gen Zs and millennials, about their fertility intentions. So they ask, do you intend to have children? If so, how many? The responses were quite shocking. Almost half of the people who've never had children said they had no plans to, and that was profoundly linked to financial insecurity. So where people felt they were financially insecure, where they felt they were less well off than their parents or their parents' generation, they were much more likely not to want a child or to think it was unlikely for them to have a child. And the researchers I spoke to who've been working on these surveys said it's not that surprising in this country where you have the age where you get your first mortgage is creeping right up into the late 30s. Childcare is famously unaffordable, and I'm sure people all around the world will understand the impact that has on your decision whether or not to have a child. And housing, we're seeing housing crises not just here in the UK, but any country that's experiencing mass urbanisation, we have this problem with housing. And in some of the countries that are most profoundly affected by fertility decline, like East Asia, it's the cost of education that they talk about when they discuss their decision not to have children or to have fewer children.
And what about some of the social and cultural impacts? I mean, there are rapidly changing expectations of the genders in our society as well.
So that has had a profound impact, and it's been really well studied, especially in East Asia, where you have some of the highest participation of women in the workforce and education, and at the same time, really unequal distribution of work at home. So, and I found this when I've spoken to women in South Korea or Japan about whether they want to have children or not, and they see their friends who already have children really struggling to keep up at work, struggling to keep up with the long working hours when they're expected to do everything at home. And for a lot of the women I've spoken to, they say, I just don't want that lifestyle. I don't want that life where I've got to work to support my family. We need two incomes, but I've also got to do everything at home. Sounds exhausting. No, thank you.
What about in countries that have quite progressive paternity leave, for instance? Does that make a difference?
There was a time period where the Scandinavian countries were celebrated for reducing, kind of battling fertility decline. So the fertility levels had dropped, but then picked up again. And this was the 90s and the early 2000s. And that was always put down to their really progressive pro-family policies. So paternity leave being equally shared between parents, which again affected this gender divide at home. So men and women were doing more equal share of the work at home. And also they had had affordable childcare. But that progress in stopping fertility decline stalled at some point, and those policies didn't seem to be doing the job anymore. And that's really confused demographers and sociologists in Scandinavia. So it seems like even when you have these really progressive policies, which I think these sociologists would agree are good for lots of reasons, so they don't want to say don't do them, but they have a limited effect. I think the profound takeaway is it's just very difficult once fertility declines to try and challenge it, and it becomes a social norm to have fewer children.
I've heard lots of discussions about why women would choose not to have children in terms of what's happening in society and culturally as well. But how are young men particularly feeling?
There's a difference between having fewer children and not having any children at all. There's, I suppose, a different mindset. One of the biggest reasons why people don't have children is because they can't find a partner. That's men or women. What we're seeing now in Europe, and it's likely that other countries will follow this trend, is a situation where it's men of the lowest income who are most likely to remain childless. And that's involuntarily childless. So it's not that they decide when they're young they don't want to have children. It's that they assume that they will have children, and then as they get older it doesn't happen. So the poorest men are the most likely to end up not having the children that they wanted. And part of this is likely this idea called the mating gap. It's a term a sociologist called Marcia Enhorn coined. She was doing research on egg freezing, and she found all the women that she spoke to were the reason that they were freezing their eggs is because they couldn't find a partner. She realised that part of the reason they couldn't find a partner is that they were looking for someone of their level of education or higher. Whereas we have this situation now where in 60% of countries, women are achieving more in education than men. So if you've got a situation where women are more educated, but less likely to partner with someone who is less well educated, there's a pool of men who aren't eligible, I suppose.
And Stephanie, there's also lots of conversations at the moment, it seems, about young men and how they feel about their place in the world, particularly in the West.
So Mayo Malaise describes the idea that young men are struggling to understand their place in the world as women are empowered. And that's creating a kind of a gap in expectation, say, or a gap in income. So the gap in expectation could be young men who don't expect that they should have a 50-50 partnership at home, and women who expect that. So there's a divergence in values. And this researcher, Vincent Straub, was saying that is really going to have a profound effect on fertility. But more than that this generation of struggling men are more likely to suffer from things like alcoholism or drug addiction. They're more likely to become prey to these deaths of despair, or depression, anxiety, addiction. And all of those things affect fertility socially, but also biologically. So he is really concerned that we're overlooking this crisis among young men, and that we're overlooking its impact on fertility.
And Stephanie, what about how society views children? Because it feels like that's changed as well, in my lifetime anyway.
So that is at the core of what sociologists are now seeing in terms of the trends in Europe. So before, having a child and even getting married was seen as something you did on the bridge to adulthood. As you started out in your life as an adult, you would get married in your early 20s as soon as you finished college maybe. So it was seen as a cornerstone event, and now it's seen as a capstone event. So you get married and you have children. Once you've achieved all the other things that you want to achieve in life, once you've arrived at a certain place in your career, once you've bought a house, once you've ticked all these boxes. And that's a profound shift, because people are delaying having a child until they achieve those things, and often aren't achieving those things, and as a result aren't having children.
The first thing that people might associate when they think about low fertility is an ageing population. Now, why is this such a problem?
Well, the way that our societies or economies are usually structured is that we have a large pool of working people who pay their taxes, pay into the system, and that supports people who need to be looked after, old people and young people. Where you have an ageing population, where you have this inverted pyramid, they call it, so there's a lot of old people, not very many working people. There's just not enough money going into the system to support the people who need it. And that worries governments.
And what about ageing populations and what that means for just our infrastructure and institutions in society?
In a population that's ageing rapidly, there's going to be a lot of things to pay for. So social care for older people, healthcare for older people, which is expensive. A lot of our economies are built on this growth model, right? We have to constantly have new businesses opening to stimulate this growth. And if there's no one to spend money in those businesses, then they're not going to survive. Economists predict in a declining population, we will have declining growth. It's not inevitable. There's a lot of different ways, different policies that governments could experiment with to try and stop that from happening. But to a certain extent, it is. If we don't have enough people paying in, then we won't have this continuous growth that we've been so used to for such a long time.
We can't all be bad, though, Stephanie. I mean, you mentioned earlier the cost of childcare.
At the household level, not having a child is a sensible choice for, economically. Like we said, it costs £200,000 over the course of a lifetime to have a child in this country. And you can save a lot more. You could save a lot more towards your retirement. You can plan for your retirement. So at a household level, there are lots of benefits. It's broadly at the economic level, where when we're used to something, we've been used to something for so long, we have to adapt to change. And some people argue that that's inevitable and governments are just going to have to figure out a different way of doing things. And there are models. In Singapore, everyone saves for their own future. So you pay into a pot. It's much more like a private pension scheme. So they don't rely on, luckily because they have a declining population, they don't rely on the working age people to pay for older people. But it's a very different system, and transitioning from one to the other is always going to be very tricky. And I think one thing Singapore has in its favour is that it tends to have quite long distance planning, and our governments, a lot of other governments around the world, don't think that far into the future.
I'm sure you're asked this often, Stephanie, but is having children bad for the planet?
I think one of the reasons that a lot of these environmental organisations don't campaign on population reduction, some do, but most don't, is because climate change is happening now, and we need to address it now, and we need to address our emissions right now. We're already seeing the impacts of it, whereas population change is much slower. Even if you convinced a whole generation not to have children, it would be another 20 years before we see the benefits of that. Whereas in 20 years' time, if we don't tackle carbon emissions, our planet will have changed potentially irrevocably. So I think there is a disconnect there. One is a slow trend, and the other is very immediate.
And of course, Stephanie, a lot of people, when they think about population decline, think about what they did in China, their famous and quite radical one-child policy, which was designed to curb population growth. But now it seems we're getting lots of examples from all over the world, of governments attempting to do just the opposite.
Yeah, and some of it is coercive and a bit troubling. We've seen that there's been limits in access to contraception in some countries. In Poland and Iran have made it more difficult for women to access contraception because they're concerned about fertility decline. So when it gets into those coercive policies, it is a bit concerning. We have seen other solutions where governments are just trying to help people have the children they do want.
Like with a tax break.
Yeah, or a lump sum of money. But those kind of financial incentives rarely work. They've been studied around the world, and they rarely seem to boost fertility. What did work in Scandinavian countries were these progressive social policies. But again, they only worked for a short time period. So it does seem really difficult once fertility has started to decline to reverse it.
What about migration as a solution? Because we talk about it all the time. A record number of people are on the move around the world. Could that help?
Well, it is already helping. So here in the UK, the US, most of Europe, we've already been addressing population decline with immigration, where we don't have enough doctors and nurses, we just bring them in. That's good, certainly for the people who come and are able to send money back, but it also has a profound effect on the countries they come from. There's this brain drain process. So it's a temporary solution that benefits some people, some countries, and doesn't benefit others. And we know it's famously unpopular as well. We're seeing such backlash to widespread immigration.
Yeah, for populist governments, it's their number one election kind of pledge and campaign is to bring migration down. Can it ever truly plug the gap?
Well, I think it has been plugging the gap for in rich Western countries for quite a long time. But then it does create problems in other parts of the world and other problems that we didn't see coming.
Are we at a point now then that it feels irreversible, this trend of the decline in fertility rates?
Well, that's what demographers predict, that we will plateau, the global population will plateau and then drop. The only thing that would reverse that is if people decided to have dramatically more children than their parents do. Demographers predict that won't happen. But, things change. Even demographers will admit that things happen that they didn't predict. So, these are all predictions that we're working with, and no one can read the future.
Stephanie, thank you.
Researchers at Tsinghua University in Beijing are building a training hospital that will be completely powered by artificial intelligence, AI.
That artificial intelligence physician will be created from the personal experiences of a large group of doctors. So yes, I believe the day will come when you will be obsolete.
China has unveiled RoboDoc, the world's first AI hospital staffed entirely by robot doctors and nurses. This groundbreaking development promises to revolutionize medicine, but how will it impact patients and the medical field as a whole? Let's explore the potential of RoboDoc and what it might mean for the future of healthcare. The introduction of the world's first AI hospital. The new kind of hospital where robot doctors can treat patients, named Agent Hospital, is designed to help many people, as the robots can treat up to 3,000 patients every day. At Agent Hospital, the robot doctors use advanced artificial intelligence systems to take care of patients. The robot doctors can understand symptoms, diagnose illnesses, and suggest treatments, all on their own. The hospital is virtual. Patients don't need to visit a physical building. Instead, they can interact with the robot doctors through their computers or smartphones. This makes it much easier for people to get medical help from anywhere they are. Researchers from Tsinghua University in Beijing created the AI hospital, scheduled to start operating by the second half of 2024. The researchers have spent 6 months working on this project, and now the hospital is almost ready to be used. A key advantage of AI doctors is their ability to work in a simulated environment that mimics real-life medical situations. They also can learn and improve on their own without human help. Because of these features, AI doctors can treat a huge number of patients very quickly. In just a few days, AI doctors can treat up to 10,000 patients. This is a huge number when compared to what human doctors can do. If we think about how long it would take for human doctors to see the same number of patients, it would be at least 2 years. This comparison shows just how fast and efficient AI doctors can be. They can handle a high volume of patients in a short time, far surpassing the capacity of human doctors. This could make a big difference in places where many people need medical help, but not enough doctors to see them all quickly. The best part is that these AI doctors have been tested using a set of questions from the US medical licensing exam, specifically the MedQA dataset. This exam is used to test real human doctors to see if they know enough to practice medicine in the United States. The AI doctors performed very well, achieving an accuracy rate of 93.06%. These AI doctors were not just tested on simple questions. They were tested on complex scenarios, especially major respiratory diseases, which affect the lungs and breathing. The AI doctors were able to handle the whole process of patient care excellently. This included consultation, talking to the patient to understand their symptoms and medical history, examination, performing tests or physical checks to gather more information about the patient's condition and diagnosis, determining what disease or condition the patient has based on the symptoms and examination results, treatment, deciding on and providing the right medical care or medications to treat the diagnosed condition, and follow-up, checking on the patient's progress after treatment to ensure they are recovering well and adjusting treatment if necessary. Benefits of AI doctor in healthcare. Helping a large number of people. One of the biggest benefits of Agent Hospital is its ability to help millions of people. Through the use of artificial intelligence, the hospital can provide quick and accurate medical care to a large number of patients, reducing the strain on human doctors and healthcare systems. This could also mean increased efficiency for medical professionals. Improve patient care. The AI hospital can improve patient care. For example, AI can quickly analyze medical data and find patterns that might be missed by humans. This means patients can get the right treatment faster. It can also assist in diagnosing diseases and suggest treatment options. This means that healthcare professionals can spend more time caring for patients rather than doing repetitive tasks. Continuous learning. AI systems can continuously learn and improve. As they are exposed to more data in medical cases, they get better at diagnosing and treating diseases. Therefore, the quality of care will keep getting better over time. Support for research. AI can help researchers by analyzing vast amounts of medical data quickly. This can speed up the discovery of new treatments and medicines. Affordable healthcare. One big reason for having these AI hospitals is to make healthcare cheaper for everyone. These AI doctors make healthcare better in a few ways. First, they ensure you get the right diagnosis and treatment the first time, which can save time and money. Second, because they're machines, they don't need breaks or vacations. They can work all day and all night without getting tired. That means hospitals can see more patients without having to hire extra staff, which can help keep costs down. And finally, because they're so good at what they do and they work all the time, they can help hospitals run more efficiently. That means they can see more patients in less time, which can also help keep costs down. Health prediction. Imagine if a hospital could tell us what might happen to our health in the future, like predicting if we might get sick or not. AI helps with this in hospitals. It can look at people's medical records and information about diseases. It then uses this information to make predictions about health. For example, it can predict if there might be a disease outbreak in a certain area or how a disease might spread. This is helpful because it helps hospitals and health officials prepare for things before they happen. They can take steps to stop diseases from spreading or to treat people who might get sick. It can also identify people who are at risk of certain diseases and suggest lifestyle changes or early interventions to prevent these conditions. Practical experience. Bringing AI into hospitals allows medical students to learn better. Instead of just studying from books, they can use AI to practice treating patients. Imagine if you could practice driving a car without the risk of crashing it. That's what AI in hospitals can do for medical students. This lets them try out different treatment plans and techniques without worrying about hurting real people. And because they're not dealing with real patients, students can make mistakes and learn from them without any serious consequences. By giving students this kind of practice, agent hospitals can help these students become great doctors. They'll be more confident and skilled because they've had the chance to learn and practice in a safe environment. And that's good news for everyone who might need good medical care someday. Improve disability health care. Imagine if instead of going to see a doctor in person, you could talk to the doctor online. This is called telemedicine. Now, what if the doctor you talked to online wasn't a real person, but a smart computer program? That's where AI doctors come in. Certain individuals, such as the elderly or those with disabilities, may find it very challenging to leave their homes. Providing healthcare services at their doorstep makes it easier for them to receive necessary medical attention without the stress and physical strain of traveling. Emergency care. In emergencies, every second counts. Having a service that can quickly reach a person in need can be life-saving. For instance, if someone is having a heart attack, waiting for an ambulance to transport them to the hospital might take too long. Immediate medical care on the spot can stabilize their condition and greatly increase their chances of survival. Remote healthcare. The AI hospital could also provide remote healthcare services, making it easier for people in distant or rural areas to receive medical advice and treatment without traveling long distances. This could lead to better and a higher quality of life. The future of healthcare. The AI hospital represents a major step forward in healthcare. It is expected to change how doctors diagnose and treat their patients, potentially leading to better health outcomes for patients. In the future, computers might play a big role in healthcare. Instead of real doctors and nurses, there could be computer programs like smart robots helping patients. These programs would be smart because they're powered by huge computer systems that understand language well. They could talk to patients, figure out what's wrong with them, and even come up with treatment plans. According to the report, these computer programs, or AI doctors, could do a lot more than just diagnose diseases and make treatment plans. They could learn and do new things all the time, so their job could keep expanding. Right now, there are 14 of these AI doctors and 4 AI nurses at the agent hospital, ready to help patients. The doctors focus on consultation and treatment, while the nurses help with everyday things like making sure patients are comfortable. In dealing with new ideas involving artificial intelligence, there are some difficulties we need to think about. One big concern is making sure AI doesn't cause any harm to people's health. So, there must be strict adherence to every rule and law set by each country on healthcare. Another important thing is figuring out how AI and people can work together well. There is a need to explore different ways AI and humans can team up effectively. Additionally, AI technology needs to be checked if it is ready to be used widely. If you have made it this far, let us know what you think in the comment section below.
Kim Seung-hwan stands up from his wheelchair. He's assisted by the wearable exoskeleton robot he helped develop. It's called the Walk-On Suit F1, and it can walk up to people with paraplegia like him and lock itself onto them, enabling the individual to walk, maneuver obstacles, and climb staircases. The suit was created by the Exoskeleton Laboratory team at the Korea Advanced Institute of Science and Technology. Weighing around 110 pounds, it's made from aluminum and titanium and is powered by 12 electronic motors. Those motors simulate the movements of human joints while walking. Fellow researcher Park Jong-soo said he was inspired by the movie Iron Man.
After I watched Iron Man, I thought it would be great if I could help people with a robot in real life. Our robot is equipped with a camera on the front, for users like those with paraplegia. Sensory abilities of the lower body are naturally more limited compared to others. The camera compensates for this lack of sensory ability. For instance, it can detect the height of stairs in front or identify obstacles in the path and help the user to avoid them.
He said the robot sensors process about 1,000 signals per second to maintain the user's balance. The goal is to create a robot that seamlessly integrates into the daily lives of individuals with disabilities, with the next step being to develop a robot to adapt to real-world conditions. Kim piloted the suit at the most recent Cyberthon competition, where it won gold in the exoskeleton category.
Please show me the first leaf that does not look healthy.
The
creators of this smartphone app say it uses artificial intelligence to provide an instant diagnosis for crop diseases and pests. It was developed by non-profit organisation Plant Village to offer real-time solutions to crop health issues. It's a boon for Kenyan smallholders like Rosalina Kochi, who has long struggled to identify the problems with her plants.
This phone app has made my work so easy. I don't have to go far, or look for someone for advice, or use any transport money. It's just me in the farm and my phone.
Akochi has been using the app since 2018 and says the difference in her yields has been vast.
You cannot compare the difference. Before, an acre would produce only 5 bags of cassava. Most were wilted or diseased, but using the modern technology that I have been using, 1 acre can now produce 200 or 250 bags.
Smallholder farmers like Akochi typically work on less than 2-acre farms and produce 80% of food consumed in Africa. The technology also provides resources on sourcing quality seeds, land preparation methods, and access to agricultural specialists. Lawrence Ombweyo works for Plant Village, training farmers and testing the AI application in Busia, an area identified as food insecure.
49% of the AIs being deployed in Africa are based on agriculture. And the reason why we are focusing on agriculture is because of the increased population and also the challenges that are being brought by climate change.
Experts say Africa requires an annual investment of $77 billion to enhance farming practices, boost yields, and improve agricultural supply chains to address food insecurity. Researchers across Africa are exploring various solutions, including introducing resilient crops in climate-affected areas and leveraging technology. But many believe AI has great potential due to its accessibility, customization, and affordability. However, barriers to technology adoption, such as lack of smartphone access, persist.
A country with so much, left with so little. Vast and barren, depleted by a deadly war. Sudan is home to me and millions of people, but a protracted fight for power has laid our heritage and history to waste.
These pyramids are thousands of years old. They're a symbol of what's happening to Sudan, a place with such a rich history being devastated by conflict and at the very least neglect.
These are the remains of the royal city of Meroe, the southern tip of ancient Nubia, a UNESCO heritage site 124 miles northeast of Sudan's besieged capital Khartoum, emptied as the months of war drag on. With the lack of income leaving its tour guides desperate and depressed.
The situation is dire. We haven't had salaries in many months, not even a little to keep us going. We are praying to God that tourism is restored, that the situation stabilizes and the country becomes safe and people can return to their homes. Tourism is so important for our prosperity.
The riches of the Nubian kingdom of Kush were kept in these pyramids until the gold-filled tops were blown up with dynamite by a 19th century Italian explorer hunting for treasure. No different to how the country's resources are being pillaged today.
This pyramid belonged to Amani Shakito, one of the greatest warrior queens in Nubian history. And she, along with others, were symbols of resistance, resilience, and strength for Sudanese women during the revolution and well before that. And now the icon to her greatness stands forgotten, just like this war.
The sad emptiness here reverberates in ransacked centers across the country. Sudan's glorious past crumbling into a desecrated future.
In this era of self-service, many stores and businesses have reduced costs by eliminating cashiers and installing do-it-yourself checkouts. Similarly, a church in Lucerne, Switzerland, has removed the need for a priest in the confessional. Now, Catholics can enter the confessional with their rosaries and recite 10 Hail Marys with the help of AIGC.
Hello, Jesus. Do you have some advice for us in this time?
In these challenging times, remember that in the face of adversity, love and faith are your steadfast guides. Just as I calm the stormy seas, so too can peace be found within your heart. Amidst life's tempests, let kindness and compassion steer your course.
Folks, do you see where this is headed? Who needs the real God when AIGC seems to have all the answers? It's almost like a biblical version of Siri or Alexa. However, the one true God offers us something much better, a personal relationship with Him. AIGC is not personal. It merely regurgitates pre-programmed words of Jesus found in the Bible. So what is missing in all of this? The Holy Spirit. You cannot receive His guidance digitally. This only happens through prayer, reading the Bible, seeking Him, and following His direction. Yes, AIGC can be a tool used by God to draw people closer to Him. However, let's not depend on this digital image of God created by humans instead of turning to the one and only God who created humankind. Innocent intentions can easily evolve into idolatry. Remember, only through the blood sacrifice of Jesus do we have the promise of eternal life. AIGC cannot provide that. Only God can bring us what we long for: salvation, true love, and peace.
The global population is growing, and it's not expected to peak until well into the second half of this century. But the number of children that people are having is actually decreasing around the world. From a persistent cost of living crisis to the rapid cultural change of this hyper-digital era, the factors fueling this trend aren't easy to define. As more and more countries see their populations age, some fear unsustainable pressure will mount on the critical social infrastructure which holds communities together. So is it possible to plan ahead to limit the impact of falling fertility rates, and are there ways that societies could even benefit from it long term? You've been studying population trends for a long time now. Have you ever seen a shift like this?
The interesting thing about population is we focus on it when something seems dramatic, but actually the changes are quite incremental. We have been seeing this serious acceleration in growth and in fertility rates and everything. And now that's starting to slow down. So we are in a time of great change. But it's interesting because we report these things, and this is our business, right? In news, we report things when there is change. But what I've always found fascinating about fertility is, and population is, it is kind of slow. You know, it is incremental in the grand scheme of things.
But we aren't talking about a decline in fertility rates in this episode, but actually the global population itself is growing, and it's growing quickly. So can you put that into context?
So I was thinking about this the other day, and I think maybe the easiest ways to describe it is my family, right? My mum had 4 kids, and each of us has had fewer than that. My brother's had 3, I have 1, my other brother has 1, my sister has none. So each of us have had fewer children than my mum, but there's still 5 grandchildren in our family. So our family is growing, and the dynamics on a global level are similar. But there's also another dynamic that's going on, which is in certain countries, you have the dynamic like my family, and then at others, fertility rates aren't declining as dramatically. So there's a handful of countries where the population is still growing quite rapidly.
Is this Africa and Asia?
Most of them are in Africa, yeah, and big countries like Nigeria, Ethiopia, Egypt, but then also Pakistan, the Philippines. And they're going to contribute hugely to the growth in the global population. But they are the minority. So by 2050, I think 3/4 of the countries in the world will have a declining population, and then some will still be growing. Nigeria is one of the fastest growing countries in the world, but its fertility rate, so the number of children each woman is having, is declining. So it was 6 in the 50s, it's around 5 now. So all over the world, this generation is having fewer children than our parents.
So can we say that by the end of this century, is this fair, that the overwhelming majority of countries actually are not going to be able to sustain their populations?
Absolutely. And the global population by the end of this century will also be declining. Between 2060 and 2080, it's predicted that the global population will top out at about 9 or 10 billion and start declining then.
And then more specifically, Stephanie, what do we know about fertility rates in areas where the population is growing fastest?
So they're still declining, but just not as fast. So in Europe, you had an average of about 4 children in the middle of the century. Now it's gone down to well below 2. And this magic number is 2.1. So if each couple has 2.1 children on average, kind of hard to have 0.1 of a child, but then the population will sustain itself. So you need to produce that number to replace yourselves in the world. And countries that are still on this trajectory of growth, they have a lot more than 2.1.
So, Stephanie, I think everyone knows that it's been a year of elections, almost or around 70 we've had in 2024. And surely in most countries, one of the biggest issues has been the cost of living. And that is surely a factor when people are making decisions around whether or not to have a child.
Absolutely. I think it's the